Welcome to Leadership in Tech, a bi-weekly podcast series on software engineering and product development. I'm your host, Pradipe Yoggi, a senior engineering leader with more than a decade of senior leadership experience in public and PE-backed tech companies. The views expressed by me or my guests are not the views of my employer or those of my guests' employers. Take a listen, share, subscribe, and comment. Hello, Michael, welcome.
Welcome, Pradipe. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is the second episode of Leadership in Tech, and I have here Michael Amster, who I know through the LA CTO Forum, and he's given some sage advice a while back when I met him, and I think this interview is going to be great because he has a very storied experience profile. And Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Michael Amster. I'm a Los Angeles-based technical manager. Most recently, I've been working at Visa for last 4.5 years, and then I'm now on to my next thing, but it is not announced. Prior to that, I worked at Ticketmaster, and then I've worked in the capacity of a CTO a few times, so local texting and messaging company called Text Plus. I've done 3 startups myself where I was the technical co-founder of those. And I've also worked in insurance, high frequency trading, and in internet where I was at Shopzilla as well. And so, been around town in a number of different roles, started in tech leadership, really with my own startup.
That leads to the first question, right? Which is, given the several CTO and VP of engineering roles you've had, and I also see you have a pretty storied educational background as well. Tell us how you grew into such a role and what you cherish about your journey.
Sure. So my start was really young. I'm one of the people of the generation where microcomputers were just getting going, and I started as a developer, right? As a teenager, I was fascinated by computers, and I was a self-taught programmer. And I started working when I was in high school. I actually worked for some banks writing spreadsheet code and Visual Basic and things like that. And I also worked for Ashton Tate back in the days when they were based. And those were kind of very formative. And, I was kind of a precocious kid. I was like 16 and writing in C. Before the ANSI standard was even out. So I was writing in real K and RC and then moved into the ANSI standard. But I was always in love with development and programming. And then as you mentioned, education-wise, I went to Princeton, and there I studied electrical engineering. But I was always kind of more of a computer architecture kind of person rather than like a circuits and
information
theory person. And I really thought I was going to be a chip designer, right? Like as an adult, I thought, oh yeah, let's be a chip designer. But the whole time, having gone through this software thing, I was very adept at, the coding projects, and I took CS classes as well as EE classes and, operating systems, compilers, all the standard type of stuff. And I did very well in those. And when I got to the point where I could make a decision about grad school, I said, let me switch over to computer science and still kind of approach it from the computer architecture perspective. And I went to UCLA for computer science with computer architecture. And there kind of had the realization, more or less, that like there's 100 to 1 jobs in software compared to hardware, right? Like, so if you want to be like a hardware architect, you're going to, at those days, work for Intel or AMD, or, one of a number of small companies if you really want to be a chip designer. While RISC was exploding, and there were a few companies out there like MIPS and stuff like that, but like all relatively short-lived, or Sun, who was doing their own RISC stuff. But software was there always. And I got a job during grad school, which really kickstarted my software engineering career, and that was at Trillium Digital Systems, where I was writing code for the networking world, right? Like, so pre-internet, writing code that was, OSI network stack, as well as this ATM, and I also wrote for the telephony network stack. And writing network code was awesome experience because you're close to the metal, you learn a lot about how networks work. And I was writing on a code. I was a very early employee in this company, so I was writing foundational code that went on to do a lot for this company. And they moved me into a role that I think was kind of the pivotal role to become a leader, which was I went from being a regular software engineer, like a senior engineer for them, into being a sales engineer, right? And so sales engineer was handling a lot of that pre-sale. So you were thrown into this world where people were trying to apply what you wrote, and they were applying it to different hardware, different operating systems, different types of solutions. So you had to think on your feet. I'll hit upon that, I think, a little later, which is this communication skill where you have to go in and understand what people want and then be able to explain how to solve that using your solution, or how to maybe go back to your own people and say, we need to make some changes here to make this solution apply to this customer if it's an important customer or an important sale. So being in that middle role where you really understood the technology, because, oftentimes I wrote what was being sold, right? Like, they're selling my code. And so I really had a very hands-on knowledge of it. But at the same time, I was sent all over the world. So I was sent to Japan 4 times. I was sent to Germany. I was sent to Korea. I was sent almost weekly to the Bay Area or Boston. And I traveled a ton, and I spoke to a ton of different people in lots of different roles. So you're being thrown into this world where you have to find solutions constantly. I think that was a very pivotal role for me on the route to being a leader. And then I think the next most important thing I did was I started my own company. So after that time in Trillium, I started an internet hosting company that morphed into WebEasy. And WebEasy was eventually a Web 1.0 system integrator. And so what we would do is we take early stage startups that I had ideas, and we would write their code. We started in hosting, which, at the very earliest stages of the internet wasn't a commoditized thing. It was still all specialized. And, we did that, but we quickly had clients that said, can you code CGI for us? Back when that was the only way to get, applications. Yeah. And we started in that, saying, oh yeah, we can code. So we went into that. We quickly realized that the hosting part was going to get commoditized by bigger players, but the coding part was still the Wild West. There was no e-commerce packages. There were no, things to do. Everything was custom. So that experience started really slow. I was myself and my partner for maybe 2.5 years, and we hired our first employee like a little while later. And then by 2001, when the .bomb went off and we closed the company, we were up to about 15 people and, had grown to about 2 million a year. So over that time, it was 6 years to get from 6.5 years, from late 95 to 2001. I think being a founder of the company was really like a wake-up call for leadership. For one, I built the technical team, so my responsibility was technology, and I made a lot of good hires, and very proud of the people I hired. Some have gone off to be superstars in the LA tech scene. So I think I did a good job of identifying talent. But I think also it was kind of what do we do and how do we do it? And, I was very hands-on, and I made every mistake, right? So the nice thing about running your own company and being young is, one, you have a lot of hubris, and two, you don't know that you're making mistakes, so you make them and you learn from them. So I would encourage people who want to do leadership to, especially if they're younger, take risks and try things, and go out and fail, right? The MVP mantra is great, get something that is a minimum viable product, test it out. If it fails, move on, right? And so that, I think the fear of failure is maybe one of the things that keep people from leadership, right? Leaders fail, right? And teams fail. And I think, I was just having a conversation with somebody about it in my interview process for this new role. And he said something that I think is very resonant, which is it's how you pick yourself up and how you learn from it that really sets apart people that become good leaders from people that kind of just are afraid of trying. And so I think that starting up a company from nothing and we bootstrapped it. We had no investors or anything, and organically growing and hiring and learning all those roles, right? So
Yeah.
being a small company CTO, you're a jack of all trades, right? Like we wrote our own code. I managed hiring. I had to figure out like resourcing by going like, are we making enough money to hire another person or not? Or work with the sales guys and say, what's in the pipeline? Work with our customers and say, what do you want to do? How do we want to build it? We latched onto certain technologies very early and kind of said, we're going to stick to it. So we're very early adopters of Java. And, we had been doing Perl, which was very common in those days. And we really liked kind of the Java part of the world. And we built a core technology on a platform, built a competency. And then I think that was also a big learning moment is, building core competency around something rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Right. How much was hard work a part of your the period where you bootstrapped and took it to $2 million? And we are talking $2 million about 24 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably $6-8 million today.
Right. So I think it was a lot of work. I was in love with it, right? So I think that there is something special about doing your own thing, right? You could sink as much time into your own project as you want, because in some ways, if you're not in love with it, you shouldn't be doing it if it's your own thing. I think it's a little different when you work for somebody else. I would say that, yes, when I was doing my own thing, I would spend tremendously late. And we also did fun things, right? So StarCraft was just getting going, and I remember many nights where one of our coworkers was in the middle of building Zerg, and his wife would call, and we had to cover for him and say like, no, John's already left the building and he's on his way home, even though he was like gonna clobber us in StarCraft, right? But it was in a way a very because we were tight knit and we were spending a lot of hours in there. We were putting a lot of work, and crush deadlines and everything like that felt pretty organic and natural. We were very small and scrappy, and so I think that fit. It fit our age. I think there is like the ability when you're in your mid-20s to pour in tons of effort and hours and wait the next day and do it again. Right? As you get older, it's not that you can put in smaller, bigger efforts. Your ability to do it over and over again, you get a little bit more fatigued. And I see that as I mature. It's not that I can't make one pull. It's I can't, do that 3 days in a row. I can do it one day and then I need a little recovery. Whereas I think in, my 20s, we would all nighter it. Like there were nights where we'd be like, this is due tomorrow, and we would be throwing crazy hours at it.
Right. The other question was how you pick yourself up, right?
Yeah.
So this .com bust happened, and then you had to close shop. How did you pick yourself up after that? What was your next play?
Well, I kind of got in with a friend, and we formed a mini consulting company, and we said, okay, let's look for opportunities. And in the meantime, we played, tons of Scrabble, and we wasted time looking for things. But every day we had this thing. We're gonna send out, we're gonna answer, referendums. We're going to shop ourselves around, and then we're gonna play Scrabble or whatever it is with the rest of the day. And we work together. And so two things were important. One is don't go it alone, right? Like if you have a failure and you isolate yourself, it's natural to feel, depressed. And I think it's really hard to get out of feeling depressed or feeling down when you don't surround yourself with peers, right? And so having this friend who is also looking for work, but we were doing it together, really helped a lot because you had somebody to commiserate with. We would go out to lunch, we'd do things that were enjoyable, and we wouldn't beat ourselves up about it, right? We wouldn't like say it's your fault, whatever. You could look around and say, tons of people lost their jobs, right? It was an event that what happened across the board, and there was really bad hiring even for very talented people, right? I did one thing that I was proud of, which is I got jobs for everybody who was part of my team first, like not looking for myself. I went out there and said, I'm gonna get you jobs first. And some were already, in the process of it. Some people were apologetic, saying, I have to get a job. I was like, don't worry about it. I want you to get a job. But you have to, as a leader, put your people first. And that's an important thing, because later on in your career, you'll run into these people again, and they'll remember whether or not you thought about them in those critical moments. And so picking myself up, eventually found some little work, project here, project there. Went to China, tried to sell Linux to some Chinese things, got some fun trips out of it. But then I looked at, joining kind of a body shop. Like the next thing I did was I joined a body shop that was hiring like architects. And since I was a CTO and I was a very hands-on CTO, I was like, I'm an architect. And they needed people who were good at, Java. And so I joined one of those teams, and they put me into an insurance company as my first project. And the insurance company loved a few of us, and they just said, we're going to hire these guys away. So what ended up happening is I got hired away, and they kind of put me in a leadership position. They said, oh, you've got this background. So they started me off as like a Java architect, but they quickly realized we're building a team. He's got leadership background, and they kind of took two of us, and they made me the director of engineering, and they made the other guy the director of architecture. And so we ended up building our respective teams. And so that was another, I would say, kind of hockey stick in my leadership career, because one thing happened that was very important. I found a mentor there who was a VP. He kind of took me under his wing, and he would tell me stories a lot and say, okay, so you're the young guy, you're in your 20s. No one, they know you're smart, but they don't know that you can survive here. It's a cutthroat world. It's insurance, right? Like somebody has to die in order to open up another position. And here you got a director position so young. So, here's how to behave, and here's how to follow up. So what he taught me a lot was the art of communication with stakeholders, right? And so when you're young and you're starting out on your career, you're thinking about the technology a lot. Like, how do I solve this problem? And how do I fix this? And how do I get my team to write the code? And he kind of turned me around and said, you're already on top of that, right? Like, I don't have to show you that stuff, but you aren't following up with your stakeholders. So when your director of claims is saying something, that's more important than what you're doing here in your team. You have to know how to respond to them. You have to know how to write to them. You have to understand how to communicate effectively to them, because they don't understand the technology, and they're scared of you. They're scared of your tech. They're scared that you're going to, make them miss their OKRs or whatever they had, and stuff like that. So there was a lot of mentoring for me to kind of become more aware that as a technical leader, I fit into this larger ecosphere. You have to communicate whatever you feel in a way that's coherent to them. And you also have to realize that, like, sometimes they get what they want, right? Like, even if it's not a good use of technology or not a good use of time, there are battles to fight, right? And so I was not aware that there were, pick your battles, right? So now I say that a lot with people. I'm like, pick your battles, right? You have a limited number of matches to light, and you have a limited amount of karma to burn. But once you get up, you're going to be known as the person who always says no, or the person who always fights, or the person who whatever. So don't pick every battle. Pick the battles you think make the most difference. And so that job at the insurance company, Zenith, really taught me a lot.
Yeah. So that's very insightful, the importance of mentorship and having the right mentor early on in your career.
Yeah.
So now, as you lead large organizations, right, you've led many of them, what values, of note that have influenced how you lead?
So I used to be very tech focused, and over the years I've become more people focused. And so I say that as one of the things that people will probably appreciate as they get older is that technology changes, and your appreciation for it and your recognition for it and your ability to see tech is very important. But being the best in tech or being the best person in your team becomes less and less important as you move up in technology. Now, it doesn't mean you should neglect technology, right? You should always keep sharp with the things that you think are important. And I recommend that even people who are leaders don't stop coding, because I think coding is something that gets rusty, and if you stay away from it too long, then the barrier to getting back into it gets too high, right? And so don't stop coding. Always keep side projects going. Do your own thing, but don't contribute to production code if you're in a leadership position, because then you're going to force somebody else to support your code, right? The key thing I like to say about organizations, it's built on people. So I am a firm believer in treating people well, being direct and honest with people, being disclosive. So my style is be a disclosive leader, but also caution what you're sure of versus what you're, partially sure of versus what's unknown, but give people information. People don't like to work in a vacuum. They like to know things, but also read the room and don't overwhelm people with information. You don't have to say everything that went on in an executive meeting, but if they are talking about directions, if they're talking about the economy, if they're talking about things that people worry about, handle that. The other thing I realize is people worry a lot all the time.
Yeah.
They worry about their jobs. They worry about whether they're on the right path. They worry about their salaries. They worry about whether their skill set's relevant. And I think that's all fair. But I also think that, my advice to people is don't worry so much. If you're doing what is expected of you and you're getting feedback through your job through regular reviews, or if you're not getting feedback, you should solicit feedback. That's more important for your well-being. And then you can look around you and say, is my compensation in line with what I'm doing at other places? Is this the right place for me to get more comp? Is in terms of managing people, treat them right? If somebody's got a personal emergency, let them deal with it, right? They're going to remember far more about the fact that you said, go home and take care of that sick kid, we'll cover for you, than if you said, something meaningless. Or if you force them to work on a night where they've got a special night, or, they've got a situation at home, they're going to remember those situations more than they're going to remember all the other things. So be aware that when you're calling in favors or when you're asking for above and beyond, to compensate people with either time where it's a little slower, never, I always think of it as you're the coxswain on a boat. And if you're constantly calling in a pace that's a burnout pace, people will burn it. But if you in and say, hey, guys, this is quieter time. This is a time to take care of your self-improvement. You wanted to learn things, use this. I use the end of the year a lot in December and say, this is, I came from financial services. So everything after Thanksgiving up until the beginning of the year is really quiet for most financial services companies, because no changes are going to go in during the Christmas season. No one wants to mess with it there. That's the time to, of the year where it's take your vacations, do your self-improvement. You want to, do a study course, do that then. So I tell people, be aware of the cadence of your year and use the periods around release cycles or, blackout periods for your downtime, greeting people, onboarding people effectively. When you have a new employee, the first thing they know is how productive were they in the first 2 weeks? Were they onboarded right? So onboarding people is a very important part of the peoplescape. And then find people in your team that are, good communicators. So I was going to jump a little bit ahead to what makes good leaders. We tend to reward the best coders with promotions, right? And say, hey, you're promoted, now you're a manager, right? And I had this great insight with Visa where at Verify, I had this guy who is a lead engineer, and I knew he was going to be a manager because I knew he actually had within the people skills. And I told him, you're a team lead now, and I'm looking at you as a manager. And he goes, well, what do I need to know? I said, it's going to be so hard for me to explain it, but you're going to need to work a lot on things that are not even on your radar right now, handling your team and knowing how to do review and having one-on-ones. And he goes, okay, whatever. And I promoted him to a manager. And like, 2 months after that, he said, Mike, I totally understand now that
Yeah.
engineering has nothing to do with being a manager, right? It demonstrates that you're sharp and that you're generally a smart person if you get to that level. But the ability for him to kind of like organize his time and build out one-on-ones and what he covers in one-on-ones and how he gives information like, you need to improve in these areas or you need to educate more. You've got to go out and you're meeting with a product person and you've got to soften the blow that, this might slip out of the sprint or whatever. He goes, wow, I wish, we knew more about that. And I said, yeah, that's what we should be training managers on, right? Like there's really no good, and I've not seen a single company do this very well. There's no management training class that really focuses on these communication skills and on how to recognize who your stakeholders are and how to, as a manager, work on that. We're so focused on writing the code. Like, hey, how do you organize your sprints? How do you do your your estimates? Are you rolling points over to the next sprint? Are you doing that? It's like, yeah, that's it. That's a big part of development, but it's not a big part of being an effective manager. An effective manager is kind of like seeing out to your peer group and going, who on the other teams am I dependent on, and how do I make sure what's important to me is also important to them, right? Like, imagine you're working in an application team and you're using a team's core library, and you need 2 features added to that core library for your deadline. How do you get them to do that, right? It's like, oh, it's not in our sprint, or it's not in, it wasn't in our roadmap for this quarter, so we don't want to do it, right? And going back to your customer and saying another team's roadmap is killing us may not work. So those are everyday situations for a technical manager, right? And you have to have a nuanced approach to getting people to do those types of things to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is such a vital part in leadership. And really, like you said, being able to connect with peers and other stakeholders is so vital, because that's what, the pulse of the organization. You can play into it, right? You can provide value, all of that.
And I'm going to say one other part about, like you said, about managing people, recognition, right? So that developers, more than just pay, right? Like, pay is what gets us into the job, but like being recognized, saying that was cool, or you did a good job with that, or look, we got that out and it's being used and the users love it, and we're doing that. People fail to do that recognition part, and I think that what we did well in our last job is we had a weekly shout out, and everywhere I go now, I'm going to do this, which is every week I ask the managers, and I especially ask the peers, shout out your peers for something they did this week that made your life better or easier. Like, hey, they took 5 minutes to show me how this worked and it saved me a whole day of work. Or, this person, brought me in and explained this library to me that we developed, and now I'm better at it. Or, I was running into a problem with the setup of Kubernetes and somebody in 5 minutes solved it because they'd done it like last week. Those are the things that got shout outs. And by the way, as a manager, I knew who my top performers were months ahead, because they were the guys and gals that were getting shouted out every week. People that get shout outs are the people that go above and beyond, because they're usually helping their peers. And as a manager, it does 2 things. One, I cannot tell you we were one of the top functioning groups because we were able to recognize each other's achievements and appreciate them as a team. And that was not pervasive at Visa. And people were always like, why is your team so much better? And we're like, because we appreciate the work being done by people. We knew who was working hard for us. And at the same time, at the manager level, it was a great way to go, like, oh, somebody hasn't been shouted out in a while. Maybe I should ask what they're up to, what they're doing, or, it was just such a easy way to recognize people, and it costs nothing, right? Like all these programs where you do points and you say, hey, I'm going to give you 5 points of recognition and you could go to the company store and get a hoodie. That's awesome. But like getting a weekly shout out in a meeting in front of all of your peers is even more awesome, right? Like, and so that was something that I would encourage people to do is recognize people even in small ways. It has such a lasting impact. It costs nothing to.
Absolutely. Validation and appreciation is such a key part of what makes a great
right.
leader.
I'm not a big ego guy as a leader. I don't really, I'm not going for the glory. I don't want to say I solved this problem. I'm fine if I say my team solved this problem, but I really loved when the team got recognized at a big way, and because it validated it. I think that's kind of what we all come in for our jobs, is we're looking for that validation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of leadership, is there a myth or two that you've uncovered over your experience across multiple organizations and different roles?
I think there's kind of like that, what's the Poly principle or whatever, about like competent or incompetent people rise to the top. I would say that leadership's all about seizing opportunities. I've seen a lot of people promoted that shouldn't have been promoted. I've seen a lot of people languish that should have been promoted. It's really, people look at it like organizations are really smart and they're doing the right thing all the time. They're not. A lot of times there is nepotism. A lot of times there is like, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The loudest person is recognized the most, right? So, that's one of those things where people go like, is every person at every level really, should they be there? And I would say probably no. Like I would dispel the myth that like somebody who's a VP or a great leader of a company got there purely on merit. A lot of times that's not true. It's they got there due to, circumstance. Just like, how do people become millionaires or billionaires? Like a lot of times they like pick the stock and their timing is great, or they were happen to win the startup race out of 12 people doing the same thing. So it's not always merit. It's there's tons of luck in timing. But I think that, is it Ben Franklin? It says like, if you're not doing it when the opportunity strikes, then you're not even in the race, right? It's like dating or whatever else. If you're not going out and trying, you can't be, a winner of luck, because you don't even have a lottery ticket in the lottery. So I would dispel the myth that everybody is competent and capable. I think that people overvalue technology. I would also say that one of the big myths, maybe one of the biggest I see in tech, is the next big thing is going to make everything wonderful, right? Like, and people old as us probably remember, like, hey, we remember object-oriented coding when it came in and replaced, procedural coding, and everything's going to be OO. Well, do we benefit a lot from OO? Yes, I think, OO structured programming has done a lot to do stuff, but has it like revolutionized everything? No. It's super easy to write bad OO code, just like it was super easy to write bad procedural. Yeah. Same thing with the internet and distributed computing, and now we're going to see it with AI. These are changes that are going to be permanent in technology, but you don't need to change the stack you're working on or know the best thing. If you know how to think and solve a problem, and you're pretty adept at picking up stuff, this is where don't get rusty comes into play. Play with stuff, right? Like if people are saying, oh, you have to know what an LLM is, and you don't know it, and you've never wrote an agent or tried a RAG stack, or even prompted it or whatever, you're behind, right? You should be doing that, and you should go like, let me understand the limits. But you should also put it in the lens of like, generative AI is the newest hottest thing, isn't going to solve certain types of problems at all, right? It's not even replace the coding process, because coders still have to recognize whether what's being generated is right and wrong. We're not at the point yet. Maybe we will get there where it's going to also be able to debug it and validate it. But like, you still need somebody who writes good prompts. You still need somebody who understands the problem. That's not going to go away with the technology. Yeah. I think people tend to do things like, I'll give you an example. We had a proliferation of database technologies at Verify, the Visa company. And, one of the things people did is they brought in Mongo. And I'm like, what problem are you trying to solve with this?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, we wanted to use a key store database, an object database. I'm like, well, because we are already, feeding into reporting programs and other things that like the data in a tabular format and like, a relational database, you've just created more work because everything in Mongo has to go through a process to get into those things. And we're not using Mongo for any of the things that Mongo is good at, right? Like we're not using the bags. We're not on. So somebody brought it in because it was cool. And I see this constantly at companies. Like, I want to learn Go. So I'm going to bring Go in here. I'm like, do you realize that like creating a core competency around a new stack, having people around for 5 years to support any code that's written in it, knowing what the security and the CVEs are on it, having it scanned, understanding the CI/CD path for this, like this stuff explodes the complexity of your little project. And people are not appreciative of the fact that like, if you're doing something and the technology that's kind of like in the core stack of your company solves that problem, it's better for you to be good at solving that problem using the core stack than to go and explore things just because they're cool and new. And I see it constantly, right? Like I have become a curmudgeon around technology because I look at it and say, every technical thing I own at my level now, I own for 10 years, right? And so what things are going to be around for 10 years? I don't want to pick winners. I want there to be like real clear things. And I get how to scale, right? I get how to horizontally scale. I get how to vertically scale. Yeah. I see very few problems in my problem set that require me going outside of my tool set. And I challenge younger technologists to say, what are you doing that requires you to bring something new to your tool set? More than likely, anything new is going to be the source of problems over anything that is tried and true. And I know it's difficult, but like, look at all of the support issues, right? Like, who do you call? Let's even go to like ChatGPT or Substack, or not Substack, Stack Overflow. You go to the places which have the answers, right? And if you're using a new and upcoming and kind of like hot technology, you're not going to have situational answers. Whereas you go on something that's like a little bit more proven,
right?
That if you're in a Python stack, or if you're in a Java stack, or if you're in a, Ruby on Rails, God forbid, stack, you're going to find like, answers around your problem set, or JavaScript, TypeScript kind of stack, right? Like those things are really pervasive. You're used a lot. If you write apps for the internet, no reason to like get off of that stuff, right? It's there for a reason. And you will find answers in Cursor and ChatGPT and the newest LLMs, because guess what they index? They index the big databases, right? And that's where the answers are going to be, right? So, and same with Stack Overflow, right? Who doesn't use Stack Overflow? So the myth is new technology solves problems. The truth is more often than not, new technology is not worth it unless there's a very specific problem that it solves for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is something that I've seen in different places as well. This fondness for something that is the latest and the coolest.
And the cost of
really what problem.
It's super high to own things, and people who are younger. So what I encourage people to do is go through a not development cycle, but go through a support cycle. Like go to a company which is supporting product in operations and see how much harder it is to add a feature to a product that's already in use than it is to add a greenfield, like completely new app. I mean, the complexity is way higher, especially in the testing realm and in the validation realm and security realm. It's harder. And so people need to spend more time doing support of existing software than they do writing new software, because I think that will teach you what the cost of ownership really looks like. And I would also say for leaders, you haven't led until you've not just developed and got something out into production, but that you've supported in production for about a year, right? Like if through a year you get, change requests, you'll get, improvements, you'll get all that kind of stuff that really will inform you about like making better decisions around managing your code. It is way harder to, change the tires of a car that is moving than it is to do that when the car is parked, right? And so you learn an appreciation for supporting production systems.
And even better is when you inherit a system that has already been built by somebody else,
Yeah.
right? And has a large user base or customer base.
And the code is
And
documented and the knowledge.
and then you have to maintain and enhance it, right?
Yeah.
That is, and I think you want to do it with the least amount of collateral damage, right? And I think
Yeah.
being very mindful of the right tools to make the business, goals met is vital.
Yeah.
Great. So let's go on to that. I think you kind of answered the thing about leadership style and how do you stay close to technology. Don't do anything that's going to production.
Yeah.
Do something on the side that keeps you close. And I think have a people focus, validation, and appreciation. These are very key things to look for. And also the coaching that goes into becoming a leader.
Yeah. And
right?
so I think the other thing for leaders, always pick who's going to succeed you, right? You should know who in your team is most likely to succeed you and groom them, right? Like the only way you move up is if you have able leadership below you that allows you to move up. No one's going to promote you if they think you're the only person that can do the job, right? So it is risky to always have people below you that are as good at what you do as you are, but it's also the right thing to do for any leader because you will not create the ability for your own movement unless you've shown that you can create leaders below you. And so that's important. Pick your leaders that are going to inherit it. Invest in them, invest time in them, make sure they're confident, give them exposure because no one's going to trust them unless they get the exposure of your stakeholder group. If there's an opportunity for them to talk to the other VPs or present something or go into a meeting where they're going to talk on your behalf, give them those opportunities because that's how they're going to get the skills to become able to communicate at those higher and higher levels where there's more and more demanding, stakeholders in the room. So that's important.
That's fantastic. So now, when it comes to challenges in the leadership role in tech, I'm sure being at Visa and all that, you've probably run into a fair share of these issues. You can never be down and always have to be up and all that kind of stuff. What are some SOPs or best practices?
Well, I think the most important things you should do is realize what's important to your stakeholders, right? So like at Visa, if uptime is important or reputational risk or security are important, then they have to be important to you and your team as well, right? So we had a very much a security-based culture, and they wanted us to be not just up on CVEs, but we had, all sorts of scans, Aqua scans and Black Duck scans and all these things. And so, being on top of both the passive and active scanning was super important. And oftentimes they felt it was more important than what you're doing right now because, once you have code out there and there is a known vulnerability or a potential vulnerability, they see that as a reputational risk. And reputational risk for a company like Visa, which trades on its name, is far more important than whatever, your piece of the gigantic Visa pie is, right? If your team contributes $100 million to a $10 billion pot, you're 1%, right? So you can't, make Visa's reputation go down just because your, VP of product said we have to get this out next week, right? Somebody in security is saying you have to fix this CVE may have more weight. And so as a leader, you have to understand that and you have to be able to go and give bad news to your product manager and say, we've got to fix this security bug before we get your release out. And that's important to Visa, right? And so those recognizing kind of like what your culture is in your company and answering to that is probably where you have to use the most discretion in how you lead and how to be decisive. So few things I take away. One, the higher you get, the more decisive you have to be. Like you're going to have less information, but you have to use your instinct. You have to use your experience. You have to make decisions. You're in a position of being a leader because you're good at making decisions and you have to know what information you need as quickly as possible. And you also have to be good at saying, I'm making this decision with these known factors, with these caveats, risk profile, communicating it out to people who need to understand that. And you make those decisions. And, sometimes, like we said at the beginning of this, you make bad ones, you have to recover from them, right? And so own them, right? Everybody makes them, own them. be the first one to fix it, right? If you make a mistake, be the first one to fix it. Also, accept them, right? Like, don't blame other teams, don't blame other things. There are times when you go like, other teams are the cause of this, and you have to bring them in, especially if there's no accountability in the organization. But, make sure you own your part of it and be wholesome about it. I don't think, if you're in a completely backstabbing culture, it's not going to behoove anybody to be honest, and it creates a pervasive kind of like thing. But I wouldn't want to be there anyway, right? Like, at least at Visa, there was islands of different cultures, but for the most part in technology, everyone was just trying to get their job done and get stuff out, and everyone was very demanding, on the goals. So, the funny thing about leadership, it all boils down to the same three things. It's like, you own the resources, you have a timeline, and you have a scope, and you're really always playing with these three areas, right? It's easiest to cut scope. It's very hard to get resources, especially, resources that are productive in a short timeline. Another myth you have is, if I add bodies to the project, it will help me get the project.
Yeah.
It's almost never true. I've never seen it unless the bodies happen to be bodies that have already become familiar with that, application or that code base, and they could be turned on day one. But if you're hiring, or if you're using contractors and you have to get somebody off the street, it's usually, in a corporate world, 3 months to get the hire and another 2 to 3 months to get them up to speed enough to be productive. So you're talking about 4 months or 5 months down the line. If you're going to need it, you should be doing it now. But if not, you're going to be what you got, right? So almost always we push timelines, or we reduce scope. And there's understanding as a tech leader that you have to be good at doing that. If you're not, you're going to get clobbered, because those are the only two levers you have. And I would say that oftentimes we're good at picking the scope, right? Like we're good at phasing, and it's a big part of leadership is, I know you want this all in one release, but we're going to have to split it into, a release with a follow-up and a follow-up. And then the key is, don't let that follow-up release get pushed back with more in front of it, right? So you have to also see it through and make sure your customers realize, we're not going to put, a tech project between your release and this one. We're not going to do like work that's important to us, but not important to you. We made a promise to you to get your functionality out the door, right? And so you have to strike balance with all of that. But yeah, I think if you're not comfortable with timeline, scope, and resource management, that's all tech leadership is. It's like, it's those things.
That's very well said. I remember first running into that when I did a course in program management in my master's, and it really stood out, and I've used that over and over, and it's such a vital part of management. So great on highlighting that. And also the insight about, like, if you need to hire people, like, start now, because it's going to be 5 months out before, you're going to have them firing on all cylinders. And so
you can't start teams from scratch. You need, like, people understaff their you need glue, and you need continuity. So you always need to have some people who understand the project or the product be part of the onboarding process of bringing people in. So you can't fully load people if you want to have a successful onboarding of your new team either, right? So we went through this process at Visa where we built a group in Poland, and it grew to be 54 people. And, we had a crazy amount of knowledge transfer to get them productive. And we said, we're going to slow down our sprints quite a bit while we're doing this knowledge transfer, or else these teams are going to be hired and sitting on their hands, unable to do things because they won't understand.
Right.
And then they're going to be, bombarding existing teams with questions. So we should upfront just understand that and slide them in. And we, in our capacities, we said, these are going to be 0 capacity sprints for the first 2 sprints, and then 25% capacity, and then 50% capacity, and then eventually, right? And so, you have to work with your technical project management to understand that, like, not everybody is the same sprint points until they're productive, right? And you have to you have to be somewhat aggressive about that because they're like, now you have bodies. And you're like, not everybody's the same. They're only productive at
Yeah.
know stuff, right? Just because you got me 50
Yeah.
people in Poland doesn't mean I have, the ability to make them you release code the same way the 54 people in LA did because they've all been here for more years, right? So it's a big.
Yeah, for sure. Man, this thing about replacing teams and all that, I just ran into recently with an organization where there was a massive layoff,
Yeah.
LA based, moving work to Poland.
Yeah.
And I think that whole knowledge transfer part is probably missed out. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like,
And
you know,
it's not like they can't figure it out. It just slows the productivity way down if they're not asking people, but have to look at the code or the questionable documentation that was left behind. So, having somebody that can explain it, answer questions, especially if you've got any oddities in your CI/CD or in your organization or, known issues with the code or whatever, people need to understand
yeah,
the thinking behind it and the architecture and why things are the way they are. A lot, especially code bases that are older than like say 2 or 3 years. There's usually some historical pivots in there, and there's code left around, and you're like all the people who know about code, like, oh, don't build on this, use this. It's the newer one, but we still have to support
yeah,
it because it's still used over here, right? And so knowledge transfer, we never do enough of it, right? Like even
yeah,
though I say I'm better than most at knowledge transfer, it's still like, you can ask my people and they're like, I wish we had more time before we had to take this on. We wouldn't have made this mistake or that mistake. And,
yeah.
but, people don't want to pay for it. So you end up having to shortcut it quite a bit.
Agree. Now, that kind of leads to my next question, which is, AI is a big thing in tech right now.
Mm-hmm.
And rightly, people are excited about it and also skeptical to an extent in terms of the challenges or what happens to copyright, what happens to confidentiality of data,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. But how do you see AI influencing product development and engineering?
I think it's going to be a big change. I think the first thing I'm seeing that is really kind of like taking hold is, agents within the IDEs like Cursor or, Microsoft's code. I forgot the name of the
VS Code, right?
Yeah, well,
VS Code,
but they've got the plugin that does like that. So I think that the first thing you're going to see is prompt-based code generation, and then also like the auto completion that's always been in the IDEs are going to get more and more sophisticated, and I do think that those are going to be big time savers, because I do think that people spend a lot of time typing or looking for answers, and I do think that there's going to be a way to say, I'm writing a Google OAuth 2 React front end, and I want to know how to do that. And there are examples there, but they're not complete examples. And it's awesome to get something that, like, I think that AI based code gen is going to just shortcut tons of those things. I do think there's a huge potential win on finding and generating test code from AI, which can read the code and generate coverage for unit testing quite well. I think those are going to be really low-hanging fruit. People are worried that their jobs are going to change from engineering to prompt engineering. I think that over time that will evolve and may be the way that coding gets done, right? Like good coders are people that are just going to be very good at prompt engineering and reading requirements and writing very good prompts, and something else will generate the code. And I think in the next phase of development, that's probably what the development lifecycle is going to start to look at. I don't think it's going to be lay people doing it though. Going back to kind of the old days, there was, like I think we all remember like Apple PageMaker, where it's going to make database programmers obsolete because you're just going to lay out the forms and it's going to generate the code. Well, that didn't happen. What happened is that PageMaker specialists who were just really good at PageMaker, and lay people maybe did a naive PageMaker thing, but when they ran into the first problem, they called a developer, right? And same thing with, client server things where it was all screen based, like you're going to do your entry form in RPG3 and it's all going to generate the code. No, there were RPG3 programmers forever, right? Like they would take that and then they would, enhance it and get the requirements. So I think the same thing is going to happen with AI-based code is that it won't obviate the need for developers. They're just going to become more like software architects because what AI is still not that good about is seeing across modules, right? It's very good within a module. But if you have to design a system where you're exchanging information between modules, AI is still really bad at that. And I think that's going to be a big hurdle for AI to get through. So I think people who can see big systems and say, how does the information move around there? And how do I get this to here and here? And what are the things I should be thinking about? And how do I make sure that the code is right? Am I thinking about security? Am I thinking about scalability? Am I thinking about, whatever, production based changes? All that kind of stuff is still going to be there, and I don't think AI is going to master that for quite a bit. So I do think we're going to see AI evolve into a tool used by developers more and more, so that you're writing less code to do your job, but you're thinking more about the problem to do your job. And I do think that that's going to leave a lot of developers in the dust, because I do think there's a ton of B-level developers who exist solely by going in and like learning the basic Java and have mentors and people that are like doing code reviews and saying, do this and do that, and being told in a micromanaged way what to code. I think those guys are going to lose their jobs, right? Like, I don't think that kind of work is going to be around very long.
Yeah.
But I do think people who can think about problems and kind of like explain what's going on are going to be, developers for quite a long time. And there is a different mindset between, product people who imagine solutions and people who implement solutions. There's different thinking, and the people who do the execution are still far more detailed about like knowing how the little pieces work. And I don't think it's going to go away, right?
Yeah.
And
that's very well put. I think that is so key to being able to see the big picture and be the guy or the person, guy or gal, assembling the solution, right? It's going to just speed up development for sure.
Yeah. So
very well said.
So, I think generative AI, I think people are looking for application for it, but there's only certain content that performs well with generative. I do think that agents are going to take over more of the UI functions. So if you want a prediction, I think complex UIs that have lots of edge cases are going to be more and more replaced by agents, because who wants to develop a UI that has like an edge case that gets like very complicated? It's nice to develop a UI that solves like 90% of your problem and then leave the edge cases to agents. So I think those that are going to be healthy trends. And I also think that because they're the point of interaction with the customers, they're also where you have all your friction, have all your opinions. It's always the hardest to get done is like a UI that everyone agrees on. So, the more we can move to smart agents with that, the happier I am, because like I would like simple UIs that everyone can agree on, can be implemented very quickly and easily.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So switching gears a little bit, in terms of hiring in tech.
Yeah.
What's your take on how things are right now, and what do you think is missing, perhaps?
Well, I think we're going through a phase of post-COVID kind of consolidation, right? So I think that during COVID, two things happened. One is the pool got bigger because people realized they can remote hire, and so if you were a local LA person or you're a local Bay Area person, and you thought like, I'm cool because I'm in this geography and I can keep my job. Well, guess what? You're now competing against people in Missouri and like cheaper to live places. And so it made the pool bigger, right? So one of the things we see is that the number of applicants for every job is crazy now, right? Like it used to be like 10 applicants. Now it's 100, right? And so that's just culturally because there's far more people. We even see like, how many ads have you seen where it's like, if you're a foreigner, apply for these jobs.
Yeah.
If you're in India or if you're in Philippines or you're whatever, apply for the jobs. And so like you're seeing the pool becoming maybe even a global pool. I think there's definitely a national pool, a global pool. And then I also see that like, a lot of companies went through right sizing. They probably overhired in COVID with a fear of, hey, this is growing. We're going to have a lot of like faceless transactions. We're going to need all these things being done in software. Now we've kind of normalized a little bit where we've gone back to a little bit more interaction face to face. People probably realized that like they were trying to grab too many headcount and resources and overpaying for them. So like I do think that the the salaries that we saw during COVID have settled quite a bit. I know that my friends at Amazon have seen the pay cuts that are going through there. So I do think there's a bit of normalization. But I also think
Mhm.
the major layoffs too. My gut feel is that the bigger companies did their right sizing up at the front end of this. So the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons have done a lot of their layoffs. And I think that that pool of available talent is more or less being absorbed in middle tier and smaller tier companies. And I do think that, people are looking at headcount very carefully. So when I was at Visa, we had a mandate to do like hiring 33% in North America, 33% in Asia, 33% in Europe. And that is a little bit of a risk averse way of hiring. And I do think that more and more companies are going to be kind of balancing it and saying North America's salary rates were really high. I can't hire everybody in Asia. I can't hire everybody in Europe. But I do want to kind of like mix it up a little bit so that we've got round the clock development and we've got salary bases that are a little bit more averaged across those geographies. So that I think is clearly happening. But I also saw that fourth quarter was awful for 24 and that first quarter is far better. And I do see more leadership positions being hired. So, leaders.
Yeah.
I've got searches out for VPs and directors and CTO level things, and I'm seeing a lot more activity now. So I do think that people are back to believing like, hey, I've got to make some hiring. I postponed a lot of hiring. I was waiting for these layoffs and consolidations to happen, but now I have needs. So I do think we're kind of, my feelings, we're past the worst of it unless the economy tanks with what's going on in trade.
Yeah.
And that's a risk, right? Like if we hit a recession, then I think people will hold back on hiring again. So I would say that right now we've got a tentative green light on hiring, but we don't have like the, wide open craziness that was happening probably year one of COVID or year two of COVID, where people were just like, hiring, right? So that's it. And I do, yeah.
Yeah. No, that was very insightful. I didn't consider the fact that opening up the talent pool nationwide and global contributes to making hiring difficult, right? I think part of it is also the ATS and LinkedIn, it just makes it very easy for people to apply.
Yeah.
Sort of reducing the bar on what it takes to apply.
Yeah, well,
right?
A lot of hiring is now done via these like online things, like so Indeed and other types of pools. We used to be Monster and Dice, but now new players have come in, and it's a lot of AI based selective terms. Look at they're picking out terms from your resume and looking for certain experiences. And I think there's a one of the things that I don't like in the way that tech hiring works is that there's always kind of a focus on we need a very specific skill and usually wrong, right? So people do. We know it. We're hiring managers, right? You see the resume stuffers that put every keyword they can into the resume because they know it's going to get them into some interviews. But like when we did interviews, what we looked at is like people that worked with teams, people that could communicate, and people that understood the technology they said they knew, right? So it was pretty easy. And I'm not a firm believer in like leak code and these other things. I think it teaches you coding, but it's also a style of coding that's not typical in most jobs, right? You're not going to be doing leak code style coding. You're going to be reading a lot of people's code, understanding code, and making small to medium-sized changes. That's most of what coding is like in a corporate world. Demonstrate leak code that like, I can write a simple thing that does a sort in 8 lines, or I can, do a prime finder, or I could do like a numeric thing. It's very rare that you actually have problems that look like that, right? It's important to know data structure.
Yeah.
It's important to know how things behave, but it's not I don't think it's a great success indicator in my experience of who becomes successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, I think Google started that trend.
It did. Yeah. And it helps. Like, it was Google and all the people that are paying the biggest salaries put up like, more and more barriers because they can afford to, right? That they're going to have
absolutely
this zombie horde applying to their jobs. So they need higher and higher barriers, but then everybody says like Google's doing it, so I'm going to do it, right? Like, so everyone's a follower.
Yeah.
Big into that too. So we would have people doing coding problems. Then we'd have like interviews with these people, and we're like, how could you have done that coding problem when in an interview you could answer, a question that was like literally that coding problem? So, I think a ton of cheating, right? Going on too. We saw that for sure, where the person doing the problem on the leak code wasn't the person coming into the interview. Is obvious because they didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So I think that it's just kind of like the remote thing. You have to be more defensive. You don't want to be catfished into believing that the person that filled in that form and that if they're not on camera in the video interview, it's a huge red flag, right? Like all that kind of stuff. So I would say it's hiring is good. Be aware of the tools. If you can't use these AI tools in making your job faster and easier, you're resistant to, I think you're going to be outpaced and outplay and replaced. Doesn't mean you have to like embrace it and say like, oh, I have to vibe code. I think vibe coding is on the other edge of the pendulum, which is like, I don't understand what I'm doing, but I'm just, writing prompts and seeing what comes out and throwing it away if it doesn't match what my expectations are. I think somewhere in the middle is where we're going to end up. So I think that if you get yourself to be more productive using the tools out there, but know what you're doing, that makes you a very hireable person.
Yeah. So say somebody is starting new in tech, right? And, starting coming out of a computer science program or starting in a support job that transitions into a tech role. What might be an advice that you might give them in terms of how they could be successful?
Well, I think that, you should demonstrate your coding, right? Like if people don't have GitHub code bases where they're like showing that like, hey, I did this on GitHub, or I've got a project, or I contributed to a project, or, I'm coding a little for fun, or I'm coding to teach myself things. They're not doing that kind of self-improvement. They're probably not going to be a very top level coder. Doesn't mean they won't be a good coder. It just means that I think that people like at the top tend to love code and tend to have GitHub projects and contribute to things and, solve problems with scripts and code and other things. And it's just like a way they work. And if you are, if you want to get yourself successful, code more, right? Like there's this 10,000 hour Malcolm Gladwell thing, but like, I grew up coding. And so by the time I was in a position where I had to do stuff, I had thousands of hours of coding. So it became very instinctual. And now I don't even know what language I'm in anymore. Like I was joking with an older friend of mine. It's like, as long as it's an Algol based language, I can pick it up and kind of like get things done. Now, am I leveraging all the features of that language? No, I'm not like doing the things of language, but there is something about being able to, just code and solve problems and do it. So yeah, GitHub projects, solve your own things, demonstrate interest. That's super important. Be interested in what they're doing, right? Like don't go in an interview not knowing about the company. Don't go in an interview not knowing like, the types of problems the company might be running into. I am surprised how many people come in for a job and don't know what the company does. Oh, what do you guys do?
Yeah.
Like, dude, you're supposed to know that before you walked in the door. Like, it's just, it's almost like college, right? Like the first question that you get asked in a college is, why do you want to come to this college? And you better have an answer for it, right? Not just to get a college, but like this college has so many opportunities and whatever, right? Like, and every college is like that, but they want to hear why you want that college. Same thing with a job, right? Like, what are they doing? What is it interesting about what they're doing? And yes, at the end of the day, you just may need a job, but to get that job, you should be sophisticated and understand that's there. Some of the things that I was saying before, work on the soft skills, work on your network is right. I've gotten most of my jobs through my peer network. And I think that like one of the things that people undervalue is building bridges. So go to the meetups, go to places where you're exchanging ideas with people in other places, cross-pollinate a little bit, because those are the people. And if somebody leaves your place of employment, link in with them on LinkedIn and send them a message every once in a while. Say, hey, how's the new job treating you? Or what are you learning? Or what are you guys doing? Because that's the kind of connection that like next, phase of your work career, you're going to call that person, or they're going to call you if they remember you, right? And that building your network starts day one. And you don't have to be like a networker. You just have to like remember, hey, if I like somebody, let me link in with them, or if I want to catch up with them, set up a chat and say, hey, I want to talk to you. I just recently talked with a friend of mine who we haven't talked in 7 years, but like he went on to like a CTO role and I went on, and we're just like, what's going on out there? What are you seeing? How are you interviewing? What do like we just, it's great to have somebody who's in a similar position to you that you can talk to about what you're doing, because you have shared experience, shared, a lot of that shared knowledge, and it's a trusted way to kind of like explore things, and you can be very hypothetical with them, and it's not like you're messing things up. You could guess, just like you're asking me, like, what do you think the future is? You look at the ball and say, like, based on my experience, I think it looks most like this. A few years from now, we'll come back and say, wow, you read that but you're very prescient about that. But that's kind of like the nature of those things. And it really is like, honestly, after my senior dev era, every job I gotten was like somebody that I worked with and remembered me, or that wanted what I could do, or that I reached out to and said, by the way, now I'm looking again. They're like, hold on, I know something here, or we want you, or something like that. So that's how you get your job after a while. It's like you're not applying anymore after a certain bit.
Yeah, totally. That's a really underlooked, especially with LinkedIn and all these online application processes, right? People tend to ignore the human component, which is so vital. And like you, I have found most of my jobs through people that I know.
And I don't use LinkedIn for the posts, right? Like LinkedIn posts can be very inane. Like, who needs to say like, here's another, working dad's thoughts about balancing life and doing this. Like, everybody's got, they're posting because they need for the algorithm to kind of like give them spread. Like, what I remember is when I see somebody like a post or make a comment, I'm like, oh, I haven't spoken to that person forever, so I'll like send them a quick note, and that's the kind of things you have to remember. It's like, send people a quick note, even like, what's up with you these days? We haven't spoken in 3 years, right? That's the kind of stuff that keeps back burner relationships alive. It's impossible once like 500 people on LinkedIn or whatever. It's impossible to keep up with everybody, but every once in a while you send out a note. Like you and I, when's the last time we spoke? Was a while ago, but you reach out and I remember you, and we're like, okay, yeah, let's do this. And that's an opportunity. And so I'm very open to those types of opportunities, and I use the tools in that way. So, I don't necessarily hunt for my job via LinkedIn, but like, for example, I was applying to a job. First thing I did is looked at who in my network works there or know somebody that works there. I sent a note over, and then I had a great conversation with somebody who's an advisor, and I said like, oh yeah, I'm not really day to day with them, but they're a good company. They're worth working at. It's worth applying to them, whatever. So, that kind of thing is really super helpful when you're applying to a place, especially if it's kind of like not a super small startup, and even with startups, like, who's starting it and what have they worked at before?
Yeah.
Do you know somebody who worked with them at another place, right? Like, it's a tremendous way to find out more, and people will feel more comfortable with hires if they have like a reference like that. It doesn't mean you'll
Absolutely.
But everyone who can reference you, or you can reference through kind of like your network of extended peers, it's a safety mechanism. It's kind of like the tribal nature of humanity. We all want to have a connection to somebody and go like, is it okay? It's like, oh yeah, they're fine. I was like, okay, that takes a load off. They were being considered, and now I feel better about it, right? That's a 50% of what I do at that level, Yeah,
cool. So in closing, how you got into tech, you mentioned like, you were coding in C back when you were 16 years of age, even before ANSI C was formulated, was it? Or
when it was still
something like that.
I got into coding because I liked games and I wanted to learn how to code. And so like, there were the Apple II computers, and people were starting to get them. They had games on them. I'm like, how does this work? And I was just fascinated by it. And I started writing in Apple II Basic, and I'm like, this is too slow. So I learned 6502 assembly, and then I bought a book on how to, game, bit blitting and page swapping and stuff like that to write for that. And I wrote tons of like games because I really thought games were so cool. And then games are a great thing because they teach you like UIs. They teach you, when you hertz in 64K, you learn like how to optimize, you learn all this stuff. So it taught me tons of really great foundational stuff. And it was also something I loved when I was like 14, 15, 16. And just teaching myself stuff. I taught myself all this stuff that I later on found out. Like I thought I invented the indirect pointer, but no, I found out that it was something indirect pointer. But like I was like, oh, there's this way to do this. Just store this in here and reference it this way. And it's like, nope, that's like you didn't invent that. That's been around. But like, you run into these things and when you love it, you don't even realize how many hours you put into it. You get into it, and that's kind of like what got me launched into it. To go, you can go to a science fair and see like a 14-year-old doing LLMs and saying like, "Hey, I've got like, I'm trying to model like rat neurons and whatever, and I'm using like ML techniques and this and this," and it's like, wow, it's mind blowing what these kids can do. And we didn't have that stuff around when we were 14. Yeah. Now they do, and they're like super smart kids that can like apply this stuff amazingly. And the other thing I would say that's really cool is applied yourself to like micro programming, like Arduinos and robotics and stuff like that. It's like there's nothing cooler than like having your code do something. It's like in the real world, right? So I love that stuff. So I that's where I play a lot, is with that stuff still, because it's cool and fun. So as long as you keep it fun, you'll be interested in it, and it won't be work. It's always a little bit of work, but it's like, if you solve the biggest thrill, I think, for anybody who has an engineering background is the thrill you get of solving a problem, right? Like you have a problem and you're battling the problem and you get to this point where you're like, I'm going to beat the problem. And then you put in that effort and you win, and you're like running around the house going, woo, I solved the bug. And your wife is like, why are you so crazy? And you're like, I solved the bug. And she's like, come and help me make dinner. And so that's so.
Yeah, that actually leads me to the next question. Like, how has your career in tech influenced your personal life and how you approach life?
I think that I'm still the guy who supports everything technical in the house, right? So I'm like the tech support for my wife's phone, my kids' iPads, and their gaming computers and all that. I don't know that it's impacted a lot. I think being a leader and being somebody who raises a family, I think it's a very similar dynamic, right? If you have kids and you have skills of being able to, punish or encourage, and, you have to like use these things. I think parenting translates so much to leadership. I think it's scary. Yeah. It's like being a parent is like, my team is my family, right? Get them to do things they don't want to do. Being consistent is really important, right? Like they teach you with kids and teach you with technology teams and leadership, be consistent, right? Like don't like react one way one day and another way another day. Like being inconsistent, is like fear and doubt and uncertainty, right? No one wants FUD. And so, consistency is important, transparency. So I think that's helped. I also have an appreciation for work-life balance more, like being somebody who raised a family. I know people are working because they're making enough money to raise their families and put food on the table and a roof over people's heads. So I look at that and appreciate it more when I see whatever situationally coming from the other side. So I think the bottom line is empathy, right? Like being an empathetic leader is so important. Like being human, relatable, empathetic. My team lose, partners, like deaths in their families. I've had sick kids. I've had people have to go to India to get married all the time. That apparently happens quite a bit. And all that stuff. I've had all these things. And so like, you have to build your leadership skills around the fact that like life happens around your jobs and through your jobs and permeates everything you do. So the more you understand that, the more you like deal with it. And you kind of have to understand what's reasonable in each of those situations too. And I think experience and kind of like experiencing things yourself makes you more, you don't want people like pushing the line, but at the same time, you also don't want to like be, unempathetic.
Unnecessarily restrictive. Yeah.
So
Yeah. The empathy part is very important. Yeah.
you are, I think over time you develop like an instinct for like what's right, in how to handle the situations. And again, that's very much related to kind of going through family stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real art, managing the organizational needs to the individual personal situations.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that your observation about family and having kids, and how it, like, there's a very striking parallel to running a group.
Yeah.
I've experienced that. When I first became a dad, I realized, holy cow, it's so similar. Like, a lot of things apply, both ways. You can learn from there and apply it here, learn from here and apply it there.
And
So it's
things are predictable, but you never like, you come home and there's like something you never expected, right? And the same thing happens at work too. So it's like,
yeah.
But I do think the key thing I take away, like you said, is one, you experience a lot of things, you become more empathetic and sympathetic to people and situational things, and I think that's a really important leadership quality. And two, you kind of like, you learn more about that balance, right? Like there's all this time demand as you become more and more involved in your family, when that age is where you're taking them to all the activities, like, hey, I have to get out of work early because I have to drop them off at this class, or take them to this, or do this, and you're the driver for a few years of your kid's life. It's like, okay, great. So how are we going to work around that? It's like, go ahead and do it, but like get on Zoom afterwards, or get on, whatever. And so we all kind of like experience it, but like the more you absorb that and go like, how do you create the balance for your team, and can you give them insights to help them create the balance so that they are affected but still, responsible to their families? That's kind of like what this is all about. And with remote work, I think especially, that becomes even more complicated, because I know during remote, I got dragged into being much more of a, driver, and do this and do that. You're home anyway, right? So let's start up the stuff that like you do and I do as a husband-wife team. I don't think I have any insight that anyone else does now, but like I've created my special space. I've created a protocol where kids don't burst into it without asking or knocking. And then like, if I do have to go, I have to go, right? So things like that, I think are good takeaways. But I think remote work and hybrid work are going to just create more and more reasons for managers to be aware of like how in this crazy way of getting teams to work and be productive, like how do you get them to work? How do you get them to sell victories? How do you get people to share information that's important? It's being all at the office isn't going to happen anymore. Being all remote probably in a lot of jobs will work, but like has its own challenges, right? Like team spirit is really tough in full remote teams, right? So they can be very productive, but they tend to be also less cohesive as than people that have actually met. It's like different strokes for different cultures, but still all these things are like, as an emerging manager, that's kind of the minefield to navigate, right? Like it's
yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating exchange, Michael. Appreciate it. Anything you want to say in closing?
I would encourage people who are interested in management to seek out mentors and talk to people doing it, and see whether they're getting validation and happiness out of what they do. If you're a very people-centric person who is in technology, very much encourage that as well, because we need people who are people-centric managers, right? Like it's not just about technology. And, that kind of closing thoughts is like, it's going to be around for a while, no matter what, downs and the new stuff. It's going to morph quite a bit, but we are always going to make things. And a lot of what we make is software to tell things how to behave. And I think that will be kind of the mode of work, at least for another generation. Is one last thing. Careers are very organic and they just happen. So people that are trying to like force their careers into like every 2 years I have to do this, every 2 years I have to do that. I just tell people like look for opportunities. If you're not getting them where you are, move and be the person that grabs those opportunities and takes some risks. Manage the risks with your home life and your family and your appetite for risk. But like that's how a career is built, right? Like no careers are linear. I think you and I could both tell people that is the biggest fallacy that young people getting into any career work is that they think it's a linear progression, and it is not. Like I didn't get to be a VP or CTO by like taking little steps and doing it. I took it by like taking a big leap and starting my own company and having that blow up and then recovering from it, right? Like it's just not, there's no way to predict what the best way to get to those leadership positions are. But if you want to do it, talk to a lot of people and plan for your opportunities and take those risks every once in a while. You'll find that that's what kind of gets you your next level.
Awesome. I love that. It's a great note to end this on. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, Pradipe.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this episode insightful. Join me for the next episode in 2 weeks where I interview another guest.